I was in the middle of pouring my first cup of coffee when I heard a sound so loud and absurd it made me flinch and spill half the mug across my robe. It was 6:12 a.m., and the peaceful suburban hush was shattered by a metallic crunch, followed by a scream that could peel paint. I grabbed my tablet, flipped to the live security feed, and there she was, Karen from 2 houses down, swinging a rusted baseball bat like a woman possessed, smashing the hell out of my mailbox while wearing a pink tracksuit and shouting about government tracking devices. Her dog, Muffin, barked wildly beside her, while her little morning clique of HOA sycophants stood at a distance, jaws slack, phones recording. I blinked twice, stared at the screen, and calmly muttered the only phrase that felt appropriate. Well, she just committed a federal offense. That mailbox wasn't a regular mailbox. Sure, on the outside it looked like your average suburban box, black aluminum, numbered 2317, with a cute little flag. But inside was a low-profile encrypted surveillance node wired directly into a federal data stream. I had spent 6 months working with a quiet arm of the Department of Internal Logistics to plant that mailbox in preparation for a long-term stain on suspected fraud activity in the area. It wasn't even my project originally. It got dumped on me after the original handler was reassigned overseas. I installed the device, ran the diagnostics, and maintained the feed. And just like that, Karen had blown the whole operation to smithereens with a $12 bat from Walmart and a gallon of entitlement. Of course, the first thing she did after turning my mailbox into scrap metal was scream that she had saved the neighborhood. I could hear her from inside the house, yelling to her audience that she had discovered hidden cameras, that I was violating privacy laws, and that she would be calling the media. By the time I stepped outside in my coffee-stained robe, the HOA president himself, Steve Withers, was waddling up my driveway in his usual too-tight polo and clipboard. Karen spotted me, pointed with the bat still in her hand, and yelled, "There he is. That's the one with the spy tech." The irony nearly knocked me out cold. Steve puffed up like he was about to conduct a Senate hearing. "Sir, we've had reports of non-compliant modifications to your mailbox. I'm going to need to inspect the damage and file an incident." I asked if he wanted to see my security footage, which clearly showed Karen destroying private property, trespassing, and then spinning up a conspiracy theory while threatening me. Steve just blinked and said, "Let's not escalate things, okay." Classic Steve, always allergic to common sense. Karen refused to leave. Instead, she stood there recording me on her phone while loudly narrating how I was part of a deep state sleeper cell hiding in plain sight. This from a woman who once called the police on a Girl Scout for ringing her doorbell without prior notice. Her friends stood behind her, nodding along like backup singers in a bad cover band. It was a full-on suburban meltdown, and I hadn't even had breakfast. The moment I shut the door behind me, I walked straight to my desk and dialed a number only 4 people in the state have access to. After 2 rings, a clipped voice answered with a simple confirm. "Protocol breach," I replied. "Mailbox Alpha compromised. Surveillance destroyed by civilian. Requesting containment response." There was a pause. Then, "Confirmed. Initiate local asset assessment. Do not engage further." And just like that, the gears of a much larger machine began to turn. By mid-afternoon, I'd had 3 different plainclothes visitors. One posed as a delivery driver, another as a landscaper, and the last was someone I only knew as Thompson, a federal agent who had been embedded in the region since the first digital trace linked one of our neighbors to a growing interstate fraud ring. Thompson didn't say much. He never did. He just watched the replay of Karen's rampage on my tablet, and then nodded slowly. She may have just compromised an entire 6-month surveillance arc, and she filmed herself doing it. I nodded, posted it on Nextdoor and TikTok within 15 minutes, hashed it Patriot Purge. We both sat in silence for a beat before he added, "She has no idea what she's done, does she?" I laughed bitterly. "Karen? She thinks she's running for neighborhood security captain." That got the tiniest smirk out of Thompson, which in his world is basically belly laughter. Things escalated quickly after that. Karen, still high on HOA approval and imaginary moral victory, began strutting around the neighborhood like she'd cracked the Da Vinci Code. She even spray-painted a crude American flag on a plywood board and leaned it against my broken mailbox post. "I don't need thanks," she told one neighbor. "I just want people to be safe from whatever he was doing." It was painful to witness. Steve, meanwhile, called a special HOA meeting to discuss resident security concerns, which was HOA speak for blame the victim. I was officially cited for unsanctioned equipment installation and warned that further violations could result in fines. Never mind that I hadn't violated a single municipal code and my actual employer could vaporize the HOA with one legal filing. But I played along for now. Thompson had warned me, "Don't provoke further visibility. Let her make the next move. It'll give us legal leverage." The most ridiculous part, Karen didn't even destroy the mailbox because she suspected the surveillance. That was just her spin. The truth came from her own daughter, who, during a bored moment at the mailbox cluster, told another teen that her mom was mad at me for not trimming the bushes near the sidewalk. She says his yard is chaotic energy, and she's sick of looking at it from her Peloton window. So in classic Karen fashion, she escalated a petty landscaping gripe into a federal interference case. By the time night fell, the remains of the mailbox were gone, scooped up by federal techs pretending to be city waste removal. My yard looked empty, quiet, but under that stillness was a storm. Karen had no idea she'd not only broken the law, but potentially wrecked an operation aimed at bringing down a criminal network with ties across 3 states. Her little victory lap? It had just set in motion a response that would completely unravel her version of power. And she was about to find out that in this neighborhood, not every box is just for mail. Karen didn't waste a second before turning her fantasy into a full-blown neighborhood performance. The next morning, she was outside at sunrise again, but this time in full makeup in a red, white, and blue tracksuit as if she had personally defended the nation. She had even taped a cardboard cutout of a bald eagle to her trash bin and was giving interviews to her own phone like she was being profiled on a cable news show. "Just doing my part," she declared proudly, "to protect our community from surveillance and government overreach. Who knows what was in that mailbox? Who knows who he's working with?" As much as I wanted to write her off as a delusional sideshow, I knew better. The more noise she made, the more attention she attracted, and some of that attention was exactly what we didn't need. Later that afternoon, the HOA newsletter released an emergency bulletin titled "Security Incident on Maple Trail. Community Update." It was clearly drafted by Karen herself. It warned about the dangers of foreign interference, unauthorized electronics on private property, and potential cyber invasions through disguised infrastructure. No names were mentioned, but the entire neighborhood knew who it was about. My mailbox, or what was left of it, had become a suburban legend overnight. By dinner, I'd heard 2 different versions of the story circulating. One that I had built a Russian spy box in my front yard, and another that I had been stealing Amazon packages and filming everyone. Both were ridiculous, but in this HOA, facts never stood a chance once Karen got to them first. While Karen played Paul Revere with her TikTok followers, the real federal team was hard at work behind the scenes. A van marked Pest Control Certified Rodent Response, parked near the cul-de-sac with 2 men inside. Thompson texted me a single word, eyes. That meant the van was theirs, equipped with thermal scopes and directional mix to monitor anyone connected to the operation. We weren't just watching Karen now. We were watching the entire neighborhood, especially Craig, Karen's new flavor of the month, who had shown up mysteriously a few weeks earlier with a giant truck, a fake Southern accent, and no visible source of income. Craig was a red flag wrapped in cargo shorts. He claimed to be a consultant in the crypto space, but had already raised eyebrows by installing what looked like a server rack in his garage and having multiple strangers drop off hard drives and sealed envelopes. I hadn't paid him much attention until the agency flagged him. Turns out Craig wasn't Craig. His real name was Anthony Keller, and he was connected to a string of identity theft cases stretching from Florida to Colorado. The mailbox had been placed to monitor drop activity related to Keller's laundering network. The plan was to let him dig himself deeper until a coordinated takedown could happen. But Karen's destruction of the mailbox forced the agency to speed up the timeline. She had broken the system's camouflage and possibly alerted Craig we were operating on borrowed time now. What made matters worse was Karen's sudden infatuation with playing detective. With Craig whispering in her ear, she started mapping out suspicious behaviors around the neighborhood. She accused Mrs. Landry, the 90-year-old woman across the street, of communicating in code because she waved the mailman using a sequence of hand motions. She took photos of teenagers playing with remote control cars and claimed they were using jammers. At one point, she even planted a fake USB stick under my porch and then found it with her phone camera while narrating a video. Look at this just lying here. It could be malware or a detonator. You tell me. Her TikTok, now labeled at HOA_warrior_Karen, had 40,000 followers by the end of the week. Thompson called me late one evening, his voice low and tense. She's accelerating the exposure. She's making Keller nervous. We saw him move 2 packages today. One drop site is now cold. I asked what we could do about it, and Thompson said something I didn't expect. You need to keep her busy. Distract her. Make her think she's winning. The louder she gets, the more we can monitor the ones actually trying to hide. I couldn't believe it. They wanted me to fuel Karen's ego, to become her personal villain, the dark mystery she could rant about while the agency tightened their net around Craig. It felt insane, but tactically it made sense. So I leaned in. The next day, I installed a completely fake panel on my front porch with blinking lights and labeled it Solar Relay Test Node. I angled it just enough toward the street that Karen would see it. By sunset, she was on my lawn filming it from 3 different angles and yelling at a confused mail carrier about interference radiation. I placed small stickers on my car windows with barcodes that led nowhere. I ordered 3 random electronics kits from Amazon and left the boxes stacked by my recycling bin. Every time Karen saw something, she lost her mind a little more, and Craig began pulling further away, thinking the heat was closing in, which of course it was. The HOA tried to host a mediation meeting between us, but Karen showed up with a whiteboard covered in conspiracy theories and a stack of blurry photos she claimed prove I was intercepting satellite transmissions. Steve tried to rein her in but gave up halfway through and just nodded blankly as she went on about electromagnetic poisoning and quantum frequencies. I recorded the whole meeting and sent it to Thompson, who replied within minutes. Better than we hoped. She just distracted the entire board for 90 minutes. You're cleared to escalate. Escalation came in the form of a letter, an official-looking gold-sealed document left on my doorstep. It was from the Department of Communications Oversight, stating that Karen was under preliminary review for obstructing federally regulated infrastructure. The letter wasn't real. It was a decoy, part of the agency's tactic to keep her paranoid and off balance. But it worked perfectly. Karen went silent for 2 days, likely consulting with her internet lawyer group, and then emerged with an aluminum foil sun hat and binoculars. She set up a folding chair in her driveway facing my house and began taking hourly notes in a spiral notebook labeled Surveillance Log. At this point, half the neighborhood was either avoiding her or secretly enjoying the show. Children were imitating her in school. One boy made a cardboard mailbox and put a plastic alien inside it with the label Government Agent. But beneath the comedy, the tension remained real. Keller was still active. We needed more time, more intel, and Karen's antics, absurd as they were buying us both. Then, on a windy Thursday evening, everything changed again. Craig didn't come home. His truck was gone. His garage door was open, and his server rack had been completely dismantled. Karen stood in the driveway, yelling into her phone. No, I don't know where he is. He was supposed to pick up my prescription. Thompson messaged me shortly after. Keller went mobile. Early extraction triggered. Damage control underway. The morning after Craig vanished, the neighborhood was buzzing like a kicked beehive. Karen paced up and down her driveway, phone glued to her ear, ranting to someone about how Craig had ghosted her after a heroic mission. She made it sound like he was some covert operative who had been extracted for his own safety, and not a federal fugitive who had likely panicked once he realized he was being watched from every direction. She wasn't panicking, not yet. She was still in the glow of her delusion, spinning it into a new narrative where she had uncovered not one but two major conspiracies, and the man she loved had sacrificed his freedom for national integrity. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so dangerous. Karen didn't just retreat after Craig disappeared. She doubled down. That very afternoon, she filed a formal request with the HOA to initiate a neighborhood security task force, requesting full authorization to inspect any package box, utility cabinet, or yard installation for what she called foreign hardware or electromagnetic threats. She even showed up at Steve's house with a binder full of printed-out Google images of security systems and electromagnetic charts she clearly didn't understand. Steve, looking more exhausted than usual, told me privately that he was considering resigning just to get out of the blast radius. Meanwhile, the federal team was recalibrating. With Keller out of the area, the original surveillance arc had collapsed, and the agency needed to start identifying what intelligence could still be salvaged. Thompson informed me that while Craig had managed to disappear, two of his couriers had been picked up in another state, thanks to timestamps and drop footage collected before the mailbox was destroyed. There was still a chance to prosecute, but it would depend on how clean Craig's escape had been. The problem was that the damage Karen had done wasn't limited to a smashed box. It was in the chaos she had seeded through misinformation, loud declarations, and a steadily growing audience online. Her TikTok, now nearing 70,000 followers, had become a hotbed of conspiracy theorists and HOA vigilantes who believed she had exposed a major surveillance effort aimed at ordinary Americans. She posted grainy clips of me walking to my car, zoomed in and narrated with ridiculous commentary. "They're subject to 2317, likely heading to his handler. Note the time, 6:48 a.m. on the dot. Same time every morning. That's not a coincidence." I didn't have the heart to tell her I just liked getting coffee at the same diner every day. One clip showed a random drone flying overhead, and she screamed, "That's for him," as if every Amazon delivery drone was part of a federal fleet. Thompson warned me that things were approaching a flashpoint. With her obsession escalating and her following growing, she was on the verge of causing a bigger disruption. The agency couldn't take public action without creating a media storm, but they also couldn't allow her to keep spiraling unchecked. That's when Thompson handed me a drive containing a curated selection of surveillance clips, carefully edited to reveal just enough truth to discredit her while protecting the actual operation. My task was to leak them, not officially, but anonymously, as a neighborhood resident concerned about misinformation and harassment. I uploaded the clips to a local forum under the name Maple_Trail_Truth. The video showed Karen destroying the mailbox, narrating her false theories, and harassing neighbors, all without commentary. Within hours, the post exploded. Residents who had quietly tolerated Karen began sharing their own stories. One woman claimed Karen had reported her for drone farming after seeing a robotic lawn mower. Another man said she accused him of using Morse code when he flicked his porch light on and off during a power test. The community, previously silent, was now roaring with laughter and disbelief. But the real surprise came at the next HOA meeting. Karen showed up with her usual swagger, dressed in a sequined blazer and carrying a clipboard. She expected applause. Instead, she walked into a room of stiff faces and folded arms. Steve stood at the podium and cleared his throat before announcing a new agenda item: reckless behavior and community harassment. The crowd murmured. Karen's smile faltered. When Steve played the leaked clips on the projector, the silence was crushing. Her antics were now public record, unfiltered, undeniable, and no longer amusing. She tried to defend herself, stammering about fake videos and digital editing, but no one bought it. The room was no longer hers. The fallout was immediate. The HOA issued a formal censure, stripping Karen of her position in the Neighborhood Beautification Committee and barring her from filing further community complaints without approval. But Karen, being Karen, didn't retreat. She went into a tailspin. The next day, she set up a tent on her lawn and called it the Karen Command Center. She hung handmade signs that read "Fake News Hoax" and "Truth Lives Here." Her tent was equipped with a mini fridge, a bullhorn, and a stack of printouts that she claimed were proof of government corruption. Neighborhood kids began referring to her front yard as Area Crazy 11. One night, I spotted her from my window, standing under the streetlight, staring at my house like she expected it to transform into a spaceship. She held a journal in one hand and a flashlight in the other, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she might try something worse. Thompson had warned me about escalation. When people like Karen feel cornered, they don't back down. They lash out. The agency had issued a quiet neighborhood safety warning just in case. Unmarked patrols began circling the area at night, discreet but deliberate. The tension wasn't gone. It had only shifted. Things came to a head when Karen tried to hold a town hall in her front yard with lawn chairs, a megaphone, and a printed manifesto titled The Surveillance Suburb. She invited neighbors, reporters, and even tagged major news outlets online. But no one came, not a single person. She sat there alone, talking into her bullhorn while a gentle breeze carried her words to empty streets. Her online audience cheered her on, but the neighborhood had moved on. The real investigation was over. The agents had packed up. The drives were secured. And the house she thought was ground zero for corruption was just another quiet home again. But she didn't know that. She couldn't let go of the idea that she was a whistleblower, a hero, a defender of justice. So she stayed in her delusion, shouting into the void while the rest of us returned to our lives. And yet, beneath all the absurdity, one fact remained. She had single-handedly disrupted a federal surveillance node, endangered an active operation, and created one of the most chaotic chain reactions I'd ever witnessed. What she didn't realize was that her time was running out. The agency hadn't forgotten her. They were just building the case slowly, methodically, waiting for the right moment. Because no matter how loud she screamed, how many tents she pitched, or how many fake documents she printed, Karen had crossed a line, and she was going to find out just how serious the consequences would be. The silence after Karen's failed town hall was eerie. For someone who had treated every sidewalk like a stage and every passing neighbor like an audience, the lack of attention began to eat at her. Her daily bullhorn rants dropped to every other day, then once a week. The tent stayed up, gathering dust and pollen, but no one stopped by except for the occasional bored teenager who snapped a photo and added it to the growing collection of HOA Karen memes. But what the neighbors didn't see, what no one saw, was the quiet buildup behind the scenes. The federal team hadn't forgotten her. If anything, they were building towards something much bigger. Thompson dropped by one afternoon under the guise of being a city utilities inspector. He was dressed in a dusty vest, clipboard in hand, and he gave me a nod as I worked in my front yard. We didn't speak aloud, just a slip of folded paper in the mulch pile near the rosebush. I waited until sunset to read it. The message was short. Karen was now officially on the agency's radar as a public interference subject. The legal team was reviewing footage, community complaints, and the exact circumstances surrounding the destruction of the surveillance equipment. She wasn't being charged yet, but the net was tightening. Despite the public backlash, Karen hadn't learned. In fact, she took her isolation as further proof that she was too real for the neighborhood. They're afraid of the truth, she posted online, along with heavily filtered pictures of herself standing in front of her tent. But I won't stop. I see them watching me. They want me to disappear like Craig. She still had no idea that Craig wasn't a martyr. He was a criminal, caught thanks to footage she inadvertently helped expose. She had become a tool of chaos, and the feds were fine letting her keep swinging wildly because every swing revealed more. But the real shift came when someone leaked the full security footage, not the trimmed version I had posted to the neighborhood forum, but the original high-resolution feed showing Karen trespassing, swinging a bat, smashing the mailbox, and shouting unhinged claims. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It came from a local journalist who claimed to have received it from a whistleblower. The video exploded online overnight. Karen went from eccentric neighborhood activist to viral disaster. News outlets ran headlines like "Suburban Sleuth Smashes Federal Surveillance" and "Karen versus the Mailbox." The bird heard round the block. The video got millions of views. National talk shows picked it up. Comedians made parody sketches. And Karen's face, mid-swing, mouth wide in righteous fury, became a meme. For a moment, she relished the spotlight. She even did a live stream to her followers, claiming that her actions had inspired a revolution. But the problem with going viral for the wrong reasons is that it doesn't take long before the wrong kind of people start paying attention. The federal kind. The legal kind. 2 days after the footage hit national circuits, a white envelope arrived at Karen's door, hand-delivered by a man in a suit who didn't stay to chat. I watched from my porch as Karen stood in her doorway, holding the letter, her expression shifting slowly from confused to furious. She crumpled the envelope, stomped inside, then returned with a full trash bag and dumped it on her front lawn as if protesting the very idea of mail. Hours later, she went on another live stream rant, this time crying. "They're trying to silence me," she sobbed. "They want me to disappear like all the others." Her followers were still there, but even they were starting to question her sanity. The HOA called a special emergency meeting. This time, it was packed. Even people who usually avoided the politics came, drawn by curiosity or concern. Karen stormed in 15 minutes late, wearing a black veil, calling herself a target of deep state intimidation. Steve, clearly exhausted and trying to hold the meeting together, stood up and held out the federal letter. "Karen," he said as calmly as possible, "this was delivered to the HOA as well. It's not a threat. It's a summons." The room went silent. Karen stared, not blinking, as Steve continued. "The Department of Communications Oversight is investigating the destruction of federal infrastructure. They want a formal interview and they are treating this as a criminal matter." Karen collapsed into a chair like the weight of the world had finally hit her. She whispered something about Craig, then about her dog Muffin being microchipped by the government. Then she stood, pointed at me, and screamed, "He did this. He set me up. This was all part of his operation." I didn't even flinch. I just folded my arms and waited. The room turned on her instantly. One neighbor, a retired Navy officer, spoke up, "Ma'am, I've served under real threats. You're not being targeted. You're being held accountable." That was it. The bubble popped. Karen fled the meeting, her rants echoing through the parking lot. The next morning, she began taking down the tent. No big announcement, no explanation, just quietly folding it up and stuffing the signs into black trash bags. I watched from across the street as she paused, staring at the old mailbox post she once destroyed. There was something hollow in her eyes, less rage now, more confusion, like she had finally realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the hero in this story. Later that day, a crew from the federal office arrived to collect final evidence. They took soil samples, removed the hidden tech that had survived, and marked the surveillance case as closed. Thompson swung by one last time, in a contractor's vest, and gave me a subtle nod. "We're filing charges. Obstruction. Destruction of federal property. It won't be jail, but it'll stick to her record. She's done." Then he added something I didn't expect. "Good work. You handled the chaos. Most wouldn't have." I just shrugged. I didn't handle it. I just let her be who she is. That was enough. The replacement mailbox was installed the next day. Identical on the outside, but inside upgraded, shielded, layered with new protocols. Karen didn't look at it once. She stayed inside, blinds closed, porch lights off even at night. Her once loud house now felt like a tombstone on a battlefield. She never understood the neighborhood exhaled slowly, like waking from a bad dream. Lawn chairs returned to porches. Kids played in the street again. The tension eased. But I knew better. There's always another Karen, always another fool who thinks rules don't apply, and the world is their personal stage. So I kept my cameras running, kept the agency's number on speed dial. Because this street, it looks quiet, but just beneath the surface, it hums with secrets. And sometimes, all it takes is one person with a bat and a delusion to make everything come crashing down. Weeks passed, and for the first time in months, the neighborhood started to feel normal again. The air felt lighter. People actually waved at each other without suspicion, and the HOA meetings returned to their usual boring squabbles about hedge heights and dog poop disposal. Karen's name became more of a whispered punchline than a looming presence. She had withdrawn completely. Her house, once the epicenter of self-righteous chaos, now sat silent behind drawn curtains and a locked gate. No more signs. No more live streams. No more wild accusations shouted from the lawn. It was like she had vanished inside herself, wrapped in the aftermath of a war only she thought she was winning. But underneath the surface of suburban calm, the ripple effects of what she did were still unfolding. The agency continued their work quietly and without fanfare. Thompson informed me in a final check-in call that several of Craig's connections had been arrested across state lines, thanks to fragments of data salvaged from the Mailbox surveillance system. It wasn't the takedown they had originally planned, but it was still a win. More importantly, it set off a chain reaction that led to the shutdown of 2 larger laundry networks linked to fraudulent charities. So in a twisted way, Karen's chaos had helped, not because of her intentions, but in spite of them. One morning, I received a letter that looked completely ordinary. White envelope, no return address, basic handwriting. But inside was a formal commendation letter from the Department of Internal Logistics, thanking me for maintaining operational integrity under compromised civilian conditions. It wasn't exactly a medal, but it meant something. The bottom of the letter included a cryptic postscript. Project Maple Trail concluded. Stand by for future site designation. P.S. We've named the new surveillance node Karen 1 in honor of her contribution. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. That little black mailbox had become a legend in its own right. As for Karen, the legal consequences finally caught up. She wasn't arrested or paraded out in handcuffs. That would have been too dramatic for the agency's quiet style. Instead, she was summoned to federal mediation. According to Thompson, she was fined, ordered to complete mandatory counseling, and placed on a monitoring list for future obstruction risk. Nothing flashy, just slow bureaucratic accountability, the kind that sticks to you like gum on a shoe. She wouldn't be leading any committees again. The HOA formally barred her from holding any leadership positions indefinitely, and her voting privileges were suspended for 2 years. In a neighborhood like ours, that was social exile. I heard through a neighbor that Karen had put her house up for sale quietly. No open houses, no signs. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to leave. By the time the moving truck arrived, nobody came out to say goodbye. No neighbors waved. No farewell cookies. Just silence, as if the street itself was grateful to be rid of her. She packed everything herself, muttering and occasionally glancing over her shoulder like someone expecting to be ambushed by reality. When she finally drove away, there was no ceremony, just the soft hum of tires fading into the distance. A few days later, the new residents arrived. A young couple, fresh-faced and smiling, moved in with their golden retriever and a toddler who loved to wave at everyone. They replaced the blackened lawn with new grass, tore down Karen's old fence, and installed a porch swing. The transformation was instant. The house that had once radiated tension now felt open, warm, and welcoming. The neighborhood slowly absorbed them without hesitation. Whatever scars Karen had left were healing quickly in the presence of normalcy. But the most unexpected moment came during a late afternoon walk. I was passing by the corner mailbox when a young man, probably in his late 20s, pulled up in a rental van. He looked around, saw me, and smiled. "Hey, neighbor," he called out. "Just moved the next street over. You ever deal with a woman named Karen?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Why do you ask?" He chuckled. "Unloading boxes. Because I swear the woman next door to me in my last neighborhood was just like one. Screamed about birds being drones and thought our recycling bins were spying on her." I laughed, but it didn't feel casual. It felt like a signal, like fate was circling back to check if I was paying attention. After he drove off, I stood there in front of the mailbox, staring at it. It looked ordinary, just like before, but I knew better. This wasn't just a box. It was now one of the most advanced passive surveillance units in the region. Every piece of hardware inside had been upgraded, more encrypted, more secure, and more discreet than ever. And now, with Karen gone, it stood in perfect silence, watching, not actively listening for her anymore, but always ready in case someone else tried to raise hell in the name of misguided righteousness. The truth is, people like Karen don't really disappear. They just find new playgrounds, new neighborhoods, new soapboxes, But here on this street in this community, she was done, and I was ready for whoever came next. Because the chaos she unleashed had taught me something valuable, not just about surveillance or federal operations or fragile suburban politics, but about what happens when entitlement crashes headfirst into consequences. I walked back to my house as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. The kids were out again, laughing, chalking the sidewalk, racing scooters. A father was mowing his lawn, waving. Music played faintly from a porch down the road. The world had moved on, but deep inside my front yard, buried beneath ordinary appearances, something still hummed, something still listened, a silent watcher, waiting patiently behind the face of a mailbox. This wasn't just my home anymore. It was a boundary line, a place where the absurd met accountability, where lies got swallowed by quiet truth. And if another Karen ever tried to pick up that bat and write herself into a false legend again, they'd find out real fast. Some boxes bite.